Thanks a lot, Honor. You're really like the best introducer of people ever. I mean, you make you feel so humble. I have to warn though that I think I had like about, well, I can't see you at all, 7 coffees less than Aaron, so my presentation will be considerably less energetic. At the same time, I'm really, really happy to be here back in Brighton because the last time that I was here was in 1985. I was 10, and I was one of those annoying Spanish kids that used to come for the summer to learn English. So, yeah, I'm sort of rediscovering a certain side of myself. So, I'm going to be probably the speaker talking less about technology today, which is weird because I'm usually in the opposite position at conferences. And what I wanted to talk about really is about this, about how reality hacking can be also be understood as a certain sensibility towards space, really, and towards our surrounding reality. I see this today in the work of a certain body of practice, much of which you will be familiar with, like for instance, in Julian's Newspeak device, which creates this sort of bubble of fiction in a specific space. Chris O'Shea's Hand from Above, which is this augmented reality public space intervention that introduces this fictional character, this giant floating hand, and which I think what it does is transform in 1 second the dynamics of the physical space where it is located, which I find is one of the most important things about augmented reality, not what it does to things, but what it does to you. And I think this is important to notice. Or the very famous image curator by Julius von Bismarck, which basically is this tactical intervention that allows you, in a way, to introduce images in other people's pictures, somehow, subtly, making a tiny bit of fiction so real that it actually appears in film, in real film. Of course, I don't know what I can say about the body of work of local heroes blast theory, which have been for more than a decade, putting tiny pieces of fiction within the fabric of our immediate reality. And other things like Mark Shepard's GPS Serendipitor, which is this really tiny piece of software, this app, which I found very interesting, which is sort of a situationist approach to GPS location, so that won't take you to a place through the shortest route or the fastest route by using other parameters like the route you've never taken, for instance, forcing you to have a different kind of approach to how you're going to use the city as a device at that point. Or even things that do things in a very subtle way. I find this very nice approach, the Everyday Project down here, which is also an app that allows you to take a picture of yourself every day and then make this film joining all the different frames to show you how you're progressively aging. But that's this thing that I find very interesting, which is introduce a habit, introduce a routine in your daily experience of life, and think about how powerful is that, going from coffee, toast, dressing up, brushing teeth, taking picture for fast film about aging. So in any case, the thing that I want to talk about, and I find more interesting, how this set of technologies, not only AR, but many other, are allowing a certain kind of reading of a space that I'm very interested in. And it's a reading of a space that allows us to take reality less literally and less for granted than we usually do. And I think this is a culturally rich thing to do. And I think it was very well expressed by this gentleman in an interview that I read a couple of years ago with him, that I think explained very, very clearly what I wanted to talk about today, which is this. I think it's important to point out sometimes something that is sometimes fundamental, which we sometimes forget, which is that the limits between reality and imagination are not stable and fixed. Realism is only one more way of describing the world, and it's not necessarily the best or more interesting. Realism is only a convention. And I'm really a big proponent of this. Like, we don't construct the world in terms of what we see and how we understand it, but we project on it our fears, our fantasies, and that big part of our mind, which is the symbolic one, the one that is built out of myth, out of stories, out of narratives that may be real or may have been imaginary. At the same time, I'm very actually interested in how, and we're seeing a lot of this recently, we are getting more and more to understand that the space can be a narrative device. And if, for instance, if you go to see Time's Up installation that is running today, that opened yesterday, I think this is perfectly explained how more and more we can understand spaces and how we frame them in terms of stories, and how sometimes it's not that these stories take place in places, but that the place constructs the story, and the place is a story in a different way. So maybe architecture and urbanism is one of the great narrative languages of today. And I'm very interested in that. I started to think a lot about these things when I read this story, and I think it was probably the one that sort of sent me on this trip. It's a story about a bus stop in Düsseldorf. I don't know if you heard about it, or you heard something about this one. So this is a bus stop that is located in front of this retirement home in the German city of Düsseldorf. And as you look at it, there's absolutely nothing different about it to the rest of bus stops in the network of the city. There's nothing particular about it except one detail that you wouldn't know just by looking at it, which is that no bus has ever stopped here. It has never picked up one single traveler, because the bus stop was not put there by the local transport authority or by the people running the transport system. It was put there by the nurses working in the retirement home. And the reason it's there is because a lot of people in the retirement home suffer from degenerative diseases, from mental diseases like Alzheimer, which means that you get to have a very bad short-term memory, but sometimes a good long-term memory. And some of the people living in this retirement house don't remember that they actually don't live at their home anymore. So sometimes they want to go and they want to live. So because they don't have much of a range of possibilities to live, what they're going to do, they're going to take the bus. And if you are a nurse looking for a misplaced person, you're going to find him sitting there waiting for a bus that is never going to come. So the thing that I find absolutely fascinating, is that this thing is somehow stuck somewhere between reality and imagination. Like, it's like the prop in a film, except that the actors in the film don't know they're actors. They firmly believe that a bus is going to come. And what I find also interesting, and let's hypothesize about it a little bit, is that what will happen if the retirement house moves and the building is not a retirement house anymore, but someone forgets to take out the bus stop. And you would have like this figment of fiction that would be sort of stuck there in the fabric of the city. It would be, if you will, sort of the fossil of a fiction. And I find that very interesting. And thinking about this sort of strange relationships between fiction and reality within the urban fabric, I sort of like to call them unlikely architectures. Basically because most of the times, and some of the ones that I find more interesting, are the result of unlikely circumstances. It's things that were going to be something and have been designed or thought out in some way, but then reality conjured in an unpredictable way. Things didn't turn out as they were expected to, and these places get stuck in there. So I got into collecting a few of them, and I wanted to very briefly talk about some of them and what they tell us about the space, fiction, and how can we augment our use of space by the narratives that spring out of this unlikely set of circumstances. So actually, this is one of my favorite ones because I love the story behind it. This is Spain in the mid-70s. We have a country that is getting out of a dictatorship and becoming a little bit more fluent, a bit more well-off, so people can start allowing to buy second residencies on the beach. So you have this real estate developer who has the amazing idea of doing a holiday resort, which is announced by the most popular character in anime at that moment, Mazinger. Actually, I suppose that copyright law was not something very enforced at that moment. So you end up with this strange film from the 70s of this opening of a holiday resort, and there is this fiberglass 9-meter tall Japanese robot in the middle of the forest. And here, a story sort of splits into two traditions. One say that actually the place was never developed. Others says that actually it was never developed, but it ended up being caught up by reality and other houses were built. But I really, really love the notion that you are in the middle of the forest and you maybe are looking for mushrooms, which is a very typical thing to do in the fall there. And then you raise your sight and you bump into this Japanese robot 9 meters tall from fiberglass from the 70s, which is actually nice because we actually had 9-meter tall robots before we had a proper parliamentary democracy, which I find interesting. Now, when we started to be able to inscribe space and to mark a space, I think myth, what was myth and stories that some people tell another, became something different. I mean, obviously the story about the Massinger in Tarragona was this sort of, not urban legend, but something that you wouldn't really get to hear about much, ever. But now we have this. We have satellite tracking, picking up robots in the middle of the forest. And then we end up with this. This is a reason where you have guys taking up a car. I'm going to see if it's true that there is this completely unlikely fiberglass robot in the middle of a forest, just because. And you go on YouTube and you find hundreds of different versions of this tree. So I really enjoy the notion that this kind of spaces became some sort of secret monuments. Also because obviously, while you could say that it has obviously no artistic value or even no historical value, it has a value in a narrative, specifically if you've grown up in the 70s and you grew up watching these cartoons or others. And I think that this element, this component of how we're going to be using, and we're using fiction in a way to look through our relationship to spaces, grows more and more relevant as we try to find these unintended overlaps, these, as I say, unlikely ways in which fiction becomes part of a specific space. This is a very powerful example to me because it comes out of science and rationality. You got like these scientists who build up a supercomputer, and this is all for weather calculation models and stuff like this. It's a completely rational, completely literal approach, but when they get to the point of saying, where are we going to put the supercomputer? Someone says, what about the chapel? So they put the supercomputer in a chapel because they had a chapel they had no use for. So this is Mare Nostrum, which is in the Polytechnic University of Catalonia in Barcelona. And the thing that I found very interesting about it is that you cannot take, as I said, this place in a literal sense because it's not only built with an all building and high-tech cutting-edge technology, but also it's built some way of myth. I mean, there are too many science fiction short stories in these foundations. Just the framing of this, it's a literary act in a way. So this takes me back to this notion that architecture can be and space can be in a way a language for fiction. And I would never approach this place without the aureola, you could say, all the myths that you are projecting on it just because it exists and it exists like this. We find more and more of this when you start looking at things that exist for very strange reasons. This is in London. I suppose many of you know it. Obviously, if I give this talk somewhere else, they won't know it that much. This is two set of houses in a street called Leinster Gardens. And these are completely regular houses that keep the continuity of the street working, except for the fact that it's not actually houses. It's only facades. There's nothing behind it. There is a very specific technical reason why this exists. It exists because the rail infrastructure in the age of the steam engine required that there would be specific spots where trains could stop to bend. And then what I find really interesting is that here it was sort of understood that you just couldn't leave the gap in the middle because that would sort of break the continuity of the city. And break it also in the sense of somehow diluting the reality of the city. So they prefer to erect these two fake houses, which have names, who have an address. And there is this story that I found absolutely amazing, and this one really calls a lot of my attention in this case, which is that if you work in the delivery industry, if you work in the sending cabs to houses or delivering pizzas, you know, and you have to know that 23, 24 Leinster Gardens is sort of an exception in the system of the city. It's a glitch, because they're tired of sending practical jokes, of sending pizza delivery boys to these addresses and giving them knocking on a door that's not going to open because there's nothing behind. So in the same way that software behaves erratically and in unpredictable ways because there's a glitch, there's also glitches in the urban fabric. And I find that very interesting. Now, I'm also interested in this case because this exists because it appeared in a time where infrastructure was something that needed to be hidden. Infrastructure is always something that we wanted to hide. Actually, I found interesting that Aral, in a way, by his demand of this holistic approach, is also somehow demanding for an infrastructure that is invisible, that we are completely unaware of its existence. This has always been like this, in a way. So the way that they did it in Victorian times was like this. The way that we do it now is just by completely neglecting its existence or not giving any importance to it. So I was reading this story by Neil Stephenson, one of the most famous science fiction writers of today, about submarine cables. And submarine cables are one of the most interesting infrastructures because they are really at the foundations of how the internet works and how we have developed this global system of communication. And we know so little about it. And one of these places that were mentioned here was very, very close to my home, and actually in a holiday spot that my family sometimes used to go to. So it was very hard to find a picture, so I literally had to go to develop this completely uninteresting place that is not in any way referred to or marked, but this is a crucial spot in our global infrastructure, because this is exactly the place where the most important submarine cable crossing the Atlantic goes from the coast of the US, entering into the Mediterranean, and then onwards to Asia. So every time that I'm there, I think about the fact that all those people that are sunbathing in the beach, which is like 100 meters in that direction, are completely ignorant and willingly ignorant of the emails, the status updates, the attached documents, the file sharing archives that are literally going somehow deep down behind their feet. And how, by being central nodes in an infrastructure, they also are in narrative terms incredibly powerful. Couple of more examples that I'm especially interested about. Another one is the way in which we're starting to frame our narratives about some spaces, not in terms of what they are today, but where they're going to be. Specifically, how are we thinking about places like future ruins, ruins that are already a ruin from the very moment that we are thinking of them. I cannot think of a better example than this one, the World, which is this crazy artificial set of islands off the coast of Dubai, which in theory was going to be like the most exclusive resort for retired people, for rich people to retire to, so you could pick up your piece of the wall. But actually, it actually looks like this, because no one of them has started development, only the one who was owned by the developing company. Here you can see the smallest golf course in the world. And the story about this place that I found very interesting is the fact that it is melting. It is losing shape. So A, it seems quite unlikely that it's going to become what they expected to, and B, probably we can sort of imagine in the, looking from the perspective of the current global financial crisis meltdown, that this space may be left on its own, so that in 300 years somebody will, or 3,000, bump into this set of islands that somehow, for some improbable reason, look like in the shape of the world. Or even places like this one, which are absolutely unbelievable. Ordos in Mongolia. This is really what, in a way, the outcomes of the financial crisis look like. Ordos is a 1 million population city. It's part of one of the biggest efforts of development in China. And it has everything. It has huge residential houses. It has nicer neighborhoods. It has huge highways. It even has monuments. It even has spectacular star architecture. What it doesn't have is people. Nobody lives here. And it's not because no one bought it, it's because they bought it for the wrong reasons.
Welcome to the city of Ordos, a city of the future. brand new and built in just 5 years and meant for 1 million residents. But no one's moved in. The city stands empty.
The cost of housing is high here. We would like to move here, but the prices are too high. Maybe later.
So this is unbelievable. Nobody lives here because it's incredibly expensive, even if everybody lives here. Because the full city is already sold, but it was sold not so that people would move in, but so that people could speculate with the ownership of a space. So we actually got to the point of doing something like this, like we're transforming the shape of the earth and landscape and the function of space to the point where this doesn't exist for the reasons that cities exist, but it exists out of the mess that we got ourselves into with the configuration of how the global financial system exists. So this is over in a way. This sense of space is probably done. So what's going to come after it? And I want to finish with this. I would say, like, if you look at the total opposite of Ordos, you end up with something like this, which is the Tower of David in Caracas, in Venezuela, which is one of the tallest high rises in South America, and it was going to be one of the most important business and financial centers in the city and in the continent. But the fact is that it's not, because it was never completed, because the real estate development company crashed. And what is now, slowly, is becoming one of the world's biggest favelas, literally. People are moving into it, into this 40 stories high high rise, which has no lifts, which has no glasses on the side, so you can literally fall to your death. And the thing that I also found very interesting and very fascinating about this is that it has people living in there, creating sort of almost a micro-society with stores, with kindergartens, up until the 15th store. And if you want to settle in there, you have to climb up every day and conquer like a new high. The same way that you would do if you are trying to climb a mountain, trying to be the one who is going to make the next step further in this sort of crazy vertical conquest. So just to finish, I'm very fascinated about this notion that with all this available space that we have now, with all this actual configuration of a reality that we develop, we're going to have to either inject meaning and inject maybe stories también into it in ways like this, or we're going to develop a different sensibility towards a space and the meaning of a space. And I think that we're starting to see signs of that. We're starting to see signs that we're going to be living in a city more and more that is defined by different parameters, a pop-up city, if you will. So in the 60s, a lot of experimental architects had dreams about the city of the future in terms of a city that was always changing shape, always changing meaning. Cities that were literally moving from one point to the other, like Archigram's Walking City, or cities that were reconfiguring in real time as they went along, like New Babylon, one of the most famous architectural utopias from the 50s. And I find interesting that if these architects would look at what we ended up with, they could find different ways to see their ideas validated. One would be like the literal one, and I don't think it's the more interesting, but you have to see this. This thing you see on the left is literally a machine, a house printing machine. This is a structure that can literally build up a wall the same way that 3D printers print out objects. And the other is a road laying machine. You can literally print down your own road and put it on the surface of a city, so that maybe you need this road for next week, and then you have to get it done because in New Babylon, the new city that is reconfiguring itself all the time and changes meanings, you do that. Or probably you do a different thing, which is actually the one that we're ending with, which is that you create a certain set of strategies by which you transform and reconfigure the meaning of a space way more cheaply and in a more direct and unstable way. And this is all very humble. This is nothing about high tech. It's when you end up, for instance, when you connect two completely different technologies, a gourmet track and a Twitter account. So the gourmet track is this track that is specialized in one single kind of food, and it's always changing position. And you know, if it's Tuesday, it's going to be the melted cheese track maybe, or if it's Wednesday, it's going to be close to you, the really good Wiener Schnitzel gourmet track or whatever. But it's the fact that there is a Twitter account that is all the time saying where the track is going to or headed to that changes our relationship to space and to the way that we approach how we build our experience of the city that day. Or this really crazy thing, this is Sunday evening on the IKEA at Shanghai, where people move on just to use it as a home. Because why wouldn't you? I mean, if you had this huge storage of living rooms, why wouldn't you use it as a living room? So then what goes from being one thing turns into a completely different one. Or in super humble things like this one, I mean, why would you decide where you want to put all the chairs, all the banks in a street, when you could very cheaply configure it in a way that you can decide in function of who is using it, how we're going to reconfigure the space. Or even just by injecting meaning, injecting sense in spaces in different way. This is a project led by a really great artist, Aaron Barthel. It's called a speed show. And a speed show is a way of turning an internet cafe into an art gallery in 3 single easy steps. You make a selection of digital art pieces. You address all the browsers in the, you book the full of the internet cafe for a full day. You put all the pieces in the computers. You hold up the opening, and that's it. And by the next day, it's all gone, and it's back to being an internet cafe. So I think this whole set of small, low-key strategies to adapt and to reconfigure space are going to become more and more, in a way, part of the repertoire of how you improve reality. That's basically it. I hope I make a little bit of sense, and thanks a lot.